Hey Internet, my name's Jeff and I'm a pastor, and I have wrapped up my Bible study on each of the passages that talk about homosexuality in the Bible, and I've put them in 6 videos that you can see on this YouTube channel, or if you're watching on my website, on my website. I've completed this Bible study, I've completed teaching this Bible study, but I've been trying to figure out if there's something that I can do as a way to sort of summarize everything here online in a video for you. But then also there are some lingering arguments that are still out there, things that haven't gone addressed just yet. So I've been trying to figure out how to weave all of these things together into one concise summary video. And this is it. I think I'm happy with it. If I'm not happy with it, then I'll give some time for future Jeff, who's editing this video, to jump in and say it's not good.
Hey, Pastor Jeff. Future Jeff coming at you from the editing process on your couch later tonight. No, the video's good. You're going to love it. Keep at it. Good work.
I'm assuming we're good. Thank you, future Jeff, for that. Here we go. Let's do it, everybody. The Bible and Homosexuality, Part 7. I think this will be Part 7. Here we go. First thing that I want to say with regards to summarizing all of this stuff together, synthesizing all of these 6 or 7 videos together, the first thing that I want to say is that what we've been talking about is biblical interpretation. We're talking about our interpretations of the Bible, my interpretations of the Bible, other people's interpretations of the Bible. This is a matter of interpretation. And the reason why I want to be so clear about this is because a lot of non-affirming people will say that affirming people just want to throw out the Bible. Nobody's talking about throwing out the Bible here. Nobody's talking about throwing out certain verses in the Bible. Instead, what we're talking about are different ways of interpreting the Bible. So we can't really make that argument that affirming people just want to throw away the Bible. And we all interpret the Bible. You may be somebody who says, well, I don't interpret the Bible, I just read the Bible. And I'd encourage you to go back and watch our first video in particular, because we address that argument there. So be sure to check that one out. All this is to say, we've been talking about interpreting the Bible, not rejecting some passages, but just how we interpret certain passages in the Bible. It's a matter of interpretation. I feel like I just said that like 7 or 8 times, but well, maybe I get the point across. Now, one of the things that I noticed in watching these videos back as I was editing them is that I found myself very often saying, if you believe in a non-affirming interpretation of this passage, or if you believe that this Bible condemns homosexuality, you have some reconciling to do. I found myself saying that a lot, or you have some explaining to do. And I wanted to take some time here in this last video to put together just a short list of some of the things that need to be reconciled if we go with that understanding of these passages that says that these passages condemn homosexuality. If we believe that, we've got some reconciling to do, and here's all the reconciling we have to do. So, back in Genesis chapter 19, with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, we find that we're left with some questions like, well, if this is about God condemning homosexuality, why is the homosexuality condemned? But it seems to be okay that Lot was offering up his daughters to be gang raped. So why is gang rape okay, but consensual gay sex isn't okay? Just a couple chapters after this, in fact, I think it's the very chapter after this, we find that Lot falls asleep in a cave, he's drunk, and his 2 daughters, who are the ones who got him drunk, decide that they're going to have sex with him so that they can produce an heir. So why is this okay? Why is non-consensual incest okay? But yeah, apparently the gay sex in Sodom and Gomorrah, that was the thing that caused the fire and the sulfur to fall from the sky. Why? Why is the non-consensual incest okay, but consensual gay sex not okay? That's another thing that we have to explain if we're going to say this stuff condemns homosexuality as we understand it. Consensual homosexual relationships. Okay, so that's the Genesis 19 stuff that we need to reconcile. Let's look at Leviticus. If we're going to use Leviticus to condemn homosexuality, then we also have to believe that homosexuality is a capital offense. It's condemned as an abomination in Leviticus 18, but in Leviticus 20, it's condemned as a capital offense. So if you say, oh yeah, homosexuality is wrong, but we shouldn't kill them or anything, and you use Leviticus to get that opinion, well, you can't, because Leviticus says that homosexuality should be a capital offense. Now, let's say that for the sake of argument, you really take that hard line and you say, oh yeah, homosexuality should be a capital offense. Well, according to some other passages in the Bible, working on Saturday is a capital offense. Also, a capital offense, according to the book of Ezekiel, charging interest on loans. So these two things should also be capital offenses if you're going to use Leviticus's condemnation of homosexuality as a capital offense. Again, you can have any interpretation of these passages that you want to, but these are the things that we need to reconcile if we're going to say these passages condemn homosexuality. Also, regarding Leviticus as an argument, and I know that this one's been overdone, but I'm just going to reiterate it here, you have to explain why you don't follow the rest of Leviticus, right? If you're going to say, well, homosexuality is condemned in Leviticus, well, what else is condemned in Leviticus? Spreading gossip is something that's condemned in Leviticus, holding a grudge, trimming your beard, mistreating foreigners, and you could make the argument here, oh no, it's just the sex stuff. Well, having sex with a woman during her period is also condemned in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 19, and that's just not something that's really taboo anymore. So, if we're going to use Leviticus as an argument, we need to explain why we don't follow the other things in Leviticus and take biblical capital offenses so seriously. All right, let's keep on moving. Romans chapter 1. I believe that we talked about this passage in the fifth video. I don't even know why I'm saying this if I don't know what video to refer you to. It's the one on Romans. It says it in the title. Anyway, so if we're going to say that Romans 1 is a condemnation on homosexuality, then we need to explain why it's a condemnation very clearly. If you read the passage, it's a condemnation about lust. Not necessarily homosexual lust, but lust in general is what it seems to be a condemnation of, not consensual self-giving love. So the question that we're left with there that we need to explain if we're non-affirming people trying to take Romans 1 seriously in the interpretation that it condemns homosexuality, we need to give an explanation about why it seems to be more a condemnation about lust rather than consensual, self-giving physical expressions of love between two people of the same gender. Moving on to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9. There are two words in this verse that could be interpreted homosexuality, but the question that we're left needing to explain, if we're going to say that 1 Corinthians 6:9 condemns homosexuality, the question that we need to give an answer to if we're going to make that argument is why in all other contemporary literature to the letter of 1 Corinthians, why is homosexual consensual sex never an interpretation of these words? I mean, what I'm trying to say here is that if we say that 1 Corinthians 6:9 condemns consensual gay sex within a marriage relationship, we're making up a definition of that word that just didn't exist at that time. We're being anachronistic if we're going to make that argument. Finally, in our last video, we talked about Jesus and how Jesus seems to assume that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that's true. Jesus does seem to assume that when he's talking with people or when he's doing his teaching. He does seem to talk about that leave and cleave text in Genesis chapter 2 where it's one man and one woman. But Jesus also assumes when he's talking to people in his time that the earth is flat. So if we're going to say, aha, Jesus assumes that heterosexual marriage is the only marriage, then we also have to say, aha, Jesus assumes the earth is flat, so I guess it's flat. Right? Just something that we need to explain. You can interpret this passage however you want to, but that is an explanation that we need to give if we're going to make the argument Jesus assumes heterosexuality, therefore heterosexuality is the only game in town. All right, so that's a quick summary of all the questions that need to be answered and all the reconciling that needs to do if we're going to use these texts that we've talked about to condemn homosexuality. Now I want to get to some of the lingering arguments that are left even at the end of this series of videos and at the end of this Bible study. One argument that's been brought up is, doesn't having gay friends or family members make you too biased to take these scriptures seriously? And to that I would say, yeah, having gay friends and family members is absolutely a bias of mine. But not having gay friends or family members, or at least not knowing that they're gay, is a bias too. Like, that's just as much of a bias as having gay friends and family members. The lack of gay friends and family members, or the lack of awareness that they are gay, that's just as much of a bias as having gay friends and family members. Next lingering argument. Isn't this a slippery slope? If we throw out the parts of the Bible that we don't like about homosexuality, what's next? Well, I would say a couple of things about this, and one is that we all, functionally anyway, we all throw out parts of the Bible, like the passages that we referenced before in Leviticus. Or just think about your daily Bible reading. You know, if you are somebody who reads the Bible daily or devotionally, you're probably not sitting around thinking to yourself, I'm going to spend some time with a good genealogy. Instead, we're going to gravitate towards the things that we like the Gospels or Philippians or some of these other books. So functionally, I would say we kind of already all throw out parts of the Bible. But one thing that I want to make clear is that I never once in these videos have said that we should throw out parts of the Bible. I'm not asking that we throw out these parts of the Bible at all, these passages that we've been addressing. I'm just offering a different interpretation. Not throwing them out, just offering a different interpretation. In fact, I'm probably doing the opposite of throwing them out by spending so many hours studying them and then teaching them and then putting these videos together. So look, I have no interest in throwing them out. I'm just offering a different interpretation. So as far as the slippery slope of, well, if we throw this out, what do we throw out next? Nobody's trying to throw anything out here. What I will say, though, is that ultimately what we're talking about here is 3 out of 31,102 verses. And I say 3 because I would really just consider the verses in Romans 1 and the verse in 1 Corinthians 6 as anything that could possibly be just straight up addressing homosexuality. So we're talking about 3 out of 31,102 verses. We're not talking about cutting Jesus out of the Bible here. If we are, in fact, talking about cutting anything at all, which again, we're not. I don't want to throw out any parts of the Bible. But if you do, in fact, believe that somebody is trying to throw out parts of the Bible about homosexuality, then really they're just throwing out 3 out of 31,102 verses. Just to put that into some perspective. All right, I want to talk about 2 more arguments. The next one is what I call the bowing down to the culture argument. So sometimes you'll hear people say, well, isn't accepting gay marriage letting the culture define marriage rather than letting God, through God's word, define what marriage is? Well, to that argument, I would say, honestly, God seems kind of okay with letting cultures define what marriage is. Because if you just look at the cultures that are portrayed in the Bible, then marriage is defined as between one man and one woman. But by the way, it's an arranged marriage, and if the bride couldn't prove her technical physical virginity, then she would be stoned to death. So yeah, between one man and one woman. But then also we find in the Bible that marriage is defined as between one man and his brother's widow. This was something that was practiced called Levirate marriage, where if a woman lost her husband before they had a male heir together, then it was the brother's job to then produce an heir for that woman. You can just Google Levirate marriage and read about it if you didn't follow any of that. So it's between one man and one woman as an arranged marriage, and the woman would be stoned to death if she couldn't prove her virginity. It's between one man and his brother's widow. It's between one man and multiple women. In fact, King Solomon had, over 1,000 wives and concubines? So between one man and 1,000 women is also how the Bible seems to define marriage. Between a rapist and his victim, and a male soldier and a virgin POW. All of these are ways that the Bible talks about marriage or describes marriage. These are biblical marriages. And I'm just throwing all of this out there, not to say, well, if you're going to talk about biblical marriage, then you need to talk about all this stuff too. Instead, I want to apply this to this argument about isn't accepting gay marriage letting the culture define marriage instead of God? Well, God seems to be okay letting cultures define marriage. God seems to be very interested, and God seems to intervene and step in when this gets exploitative. But look at all of the different ways that marriage is defined in the Bible. Look at all the different ways that God seemed okay with a culture defining as marriage. And you might say to yourself, well, yeah, but all of that stuff, those are side stories. Those aren't things that we really focus on with regards to getting information about what a romantic relationship or an ideal romantic relationship would look like. We don't look at those stories. The Bible doesn't focus on those stories. Well, the Bible does focus a lot on those stories and seem to lift them up as ideals even for romantic relationships. The biblical example of what a romantic relationship might look like isn't always just between one man and one woman. Instead, just as an example, we find a book right in the middle of the Bible called the Song of Solomon. This is an entire book that's an erotic poem that a king wrote for one of his 1,000 wives or concubines. So to make that argument that we're bowing down to the culture and letting the culture define what marriage is, well, yeah, that seems to happen in the Bible, and God seems to be totally okay with that. And in fact, in the holy book that God picked, if we're even going to use that language to talk about the Bible, in that holy book of the Bible, we find an entire book lauding what romantic relationships should look like. And it was a relationship between a man and a woman, but she was one of 1,000 women. One last argument that I want to talk about, and it kind of piggybacks on this one. The argument basically says, but isn't heterosexual marriage God's ideal? Because after all, God created humanity as male and female, or the way that it was put to me on the last night of the Bible study, quite bluntly, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. The argument is basically God created humanity male and female, so regardless of everything else that happened in the Bible, we know that at the very beginning, God's ideal was one man and one woman, Adam and Eve. Now, again, a couple of things to say about this argument, and one is that this argument basically comes from an idea that's known as gender complementarity. And that's basically the idea that men and women are actually designed to be with each other. So, for example, men and women are designed to have babies together. And therefore, the argument would continue, therefore, marriage is supposed to be between one man and one woman because men and women are created for each other for the sake of procreation. Well, if you want to make this Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve argument and bring procreation into the discussion, you're going to run into some problems pretty quickly, because what about couples that are infertile? Heterosexual couples that are infertile? Or just plain don't want to have kids at any point? Why would you celebrate those marriages if it's about gender complementarity for the sake of procreation? Or why would you celebrate the marriage of a straight elderly couple where the woman has already been through menopause and therefore they can't have kids? If you're going to bring procreation into this gender complementarity argument, then these aren't things that would be worth celebrating. These marriages shouldn't be allowed if we're going to make the argument about procreation. But gender complementarity also goes a step further, which is basically men's bodies and women's bodies are designed to give pleasure to one another or receive pleasure from one another. Well, if you're going to make the gender complementarity argument and bring sexual gratification into it or sexual pleasure into it, then you need to explain why so many gay couples report having more satisfied sex lives than straight couples. If you're going to make the gender complementarity argument and bring sex into it and say men and women are designed to experience pleasure with one another, therefore it's heterosexuality and that's the only game in town, well, why are so many gay couples sexually satisfied? More so than straight couples. But the other argument that's being made here with the whole Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve thing, aside from gender complementarity, is a textual thing, which is basically plain and simple, before the fall of humanity, before sin entered the picture, it was one man and one woman, and therefore that's what God really wants. I hate to bring more questions into this thing that need to be answered if you're going to make that argument, but, well, actually, I don't hate that. But we've got some more questions that need to be answered. So, for example, if you're going to say, it was this way in Adam and Eve, that's God's ideal, so that's what we should be striving for, then why aren't we considering a nudist lifestyle more seriously? And it sounds like I'm being cheeky here. Did I really just say cheeky? Oh my. I can't think of another thing to say now, so I'm just going to stick with it. It sounds like we're being cheeky here. I can't stop laughing now. It sounds like I'm being cheeky here, but the book of Genesis is sure to highlight the fact that part of the pleasure in the Garden of Eden was the fact that men and women, or Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, were naked and they were not ashamed. So why aren't we considering a nudist lifestyle if it's all about the way that things were with Adam and Eve? Okay, that sounds like a ridiculous argument. That sounds cheeky. I'll say it again. But another practical thing to consider here is also the fact that apparently, at least according to Genesis chapter 9, verse 3, Adam and Eve didn't eat meat. Adam and Eve were vegetarians. So at very least, if we're going to say it's about getting back to how things were before the fall, it's about getting back to the garden, however you want to put that, then part and parcel of that should also be vegetarianism. And if you say, well, that's a lesser issue than this whole sexuality thing, then I'm just going to venture a guess here, and I'm going to say you probably eat more often than you have sex. I don't know your personal life. I don't want to know your personal life, but I'm going to guess that you probably eat more often than you have sex. Therefore, the eating thing probably is a bigger issue than the sex thing. So if you're going to make this argument about, it's getting back to God's ideal, it's being more like Adam and Eve, then why no vegetarianism? Whoa there, past Jeff. Future Jeff cutting in again because you were just doing the dishes at 10:28 p.m. and you realized something else, which is that procreation didn't even come until after the fall in Genesis chapter 3. So if you say that Adam and Eve are the ideal, the pre-fall ideal, and then you try to bring procreation into the argument, then procreation didn't happen until after the fall, so you have even more explaining to do. So anyway, just throwing that in there to complicate things even further. Anyway, back to your video. Okay, everybody. I think that's it. I think I just recorded the summary video. I think this is part 7 of 7. Unless I think of some other things to record, then I'll start putting up more videos. But anyway, click like and subscribe. Tell your friends and family. Leave comments. All the things. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for watching. And let me know through email, social media, or the comments what future videos you might like to see. If any. I probably shouldn't have assumed that. If you're having a hard time locating all of these videos on YouTube, they are all available in order on my website, which is hearjefftalk.com. And you'll also find some audio recordings of sermons up there, and you can subscribe to those as podcasts. They'll be beamed to your phone through internet magic every time I put one up. That's it, everybody. Grace and peace be with you.